Hi, I'm Paul Tilley, and today we're looking at microeconomics. And in this discussion, we'll be talking about perfect competition. But first, a little overview of the competitive markets. We got this issue of market structures, and market structures is really how the supply and demand situation is organized in a given market situation or a given industry, let's say. So people go out and buy things and suppliers supply things. That's what we mean by the market, is that interaction of buyers and suppliers. And the question is, are all markets the same? And the answer is certainly not. Certainly not. They range. And they range in such a way of answering these couple of questions. Each industry or each firm within an industry is going to ask a couple of questions. And depending on how they answer those questions is really going to dictate the type of market they're in. What output will a firm choose to produce at, and what price will prevail are the two key things. Depending on the type of market that you're in, you might be able to answer that question, or you might have it answered for you. Okay, so when we look at our first one, the perfectly competitive market, we're going to have both of those really answered for you. The market is going to dictate what level of, well, I suppose you can choose which level of output you work at, but the fact is that you're going to pick a level of output that causes you the maximum benefit, okay? And the price in the market is solely dictated by the market. We talk too in here more on a focus on the industry versus the firm. The firm operates in an industry, okay? So North Atlantic Refining here in Newfoundland and Labrador operates in the refining industry, or even more broadly, the oil and gas industry. So it's one firm that operates in a very large, very competitive industry. And we're seeing the effects of that competitive market and changes in that competitive market now on that particular firm. As I say, the market is really the interaction of producers and consumers within that industry. We're looking at four basic types of industries. They're exemplified on the extremes by perfect competition, which is a commodity type market where all products are basically the same, and the buyer is really going to decide what he or she buys. The other extreme is a monopoly where the seller is the only producer, a single sole producer. It's it. If we look at Pfizer, for example, Pfizer last week announced that they had the magic bullet for the COVID. And so as of right now, they're really a monopoly producer. They're the only ones who are producing it. And because of that, they have a large, very large market, about 7 billion people on Earth. And they're the only producer. So they're very much a monopoly at this instant. That will be fleeting because other manufacturers are coming up with plans as well. And that's going to change the water on the beams here. The reality is that there are very few perfect competitive markets and very few monopoly markets. Most things operate somewhere between. And in between, we have one that's called a monopolistic competition. And we have lots of producers in monopolistic competition, each selling a slightly differentiated product. You could think of the automobile industry as more of a monopolistic competition. There's only a handful of producers of cars. Now, there's lots of producers of cars, but in terms of the consumer market, you're going to pick one of the top 5 brands, right? And we got an oligopoly. An oligopoly is even a theory. You have fewer producers, even fewer producers. There's probably one, 2 or 3 suppliers at most, and they either sell slightly differentiated products or products that are identical, such as gasoline, for example. We saw the characteristics of these markets. I'm going to focus primarily on perfect competition here because perfect competition is what we're talking about. If we think about the number of the sellers, there's lots and lots of sellers. There's numerous sellers. If we think about the product, as I said, they're commodities. They're identical products. They're exactly the same. Paper, tends to be paper. You know, it's made at a certain standard. Um, it doesn't matter who the manufacturer is. If you go look at paper that you put in a photocopy or a printer, for example, it doesn't matter what manufacturer you buy from, the paper is identical. Same size, same weight, same color, same everything. The ease and the entry into the market in a perfectly competitive market is quite easy. I always analogize it to us going and becoming fishermen. If the whole class were to become fisher people, and we all go fish cod, and we all go sell those cod, they're identical products. Each of us gets to stand on the wharf at the end of the day and hold up a cod and say, for sale. And really, all of us are selling exactly the same thing. It didn't take too much for Now, I want to look now at the perfectly competitive market, this very first one. And perfect competition is really defined as a market in which the participants, the sellers that it is, are all price takers. They cannot set the price. So the Newfoundland oil and gas industry, for example, is very much a price taker. The price that is charged for oil coming out of Hibernia is set by the market. It's not set by individuals. It's not set by ExxonMobil. It's set by the market. So in this unit, we're going to explain the conditions necessary for that perfect competition to exist. We're going to use two different approaches to explain how a company maximizes its profits as it works in a competitive environment. We're going to explain what's meant by this concept of break-even pricing. And we're going to look at something called shutdown pricing, which is very important for an industry. They got to determine what time do we call it quits. And we're going to explain the benefits of perfectly competitive markets. So we're going to develop an understanding why perfectly competitive markets sometimes fail to achieve the desired results. And we're going to develop an understanding of how too many of a certain undesirable product might be produced in competitive markets. So, you know, the market can sometimes go wrong. We'll look at that in the next chapter. And we're going to develop an understanding of why certain desirable products may not get produced at all, which is what I consider to be the 6 and 7 are the most interesting parts of the whole discussion, and it occurs in the next chapter. Okay, in terms of a perfect competition, what do we see? Again, just a reiteration of what we looked at. We got many sellers, many sellers. So you as a buyer have lots and lots of choice. The product is identical. It doesn't matter who you buy it from. It's the same thing. It's all identical. And the ease of market entry and exit is there. You know, you can easily get into it and easily get out of the business. And really, most small businesses that we think about, because people are starting them, they tend to work in competitive environments because it's so easy to get into that market. The seller's control over the price is non-existent. You have absolutely no control. And you could think of example industries such as oil, iron ore, salt fish. Welcome to Newfoundland. You know, that's what I just say. That's the type of business we work in. So if we want to put a really hard definition on what we mean by competition, there has to be 4 conditions met in order for something to be defined as a purely competitive market. And these are very important. First, there has to be many buyers and sellers, all of whom are price takers. Nobody has control over the price, and there's lots of them. There is no preference shown. In fact, as a buyer, I don't care who I buy from. So really, you know, the sellers are at the whim of the buyer. Firms can enter the market easily and leave the market easily. And probably one that's often overlooked but very important is that everyone, buyers and sellers, have all of the available information. There's nothing hidden. Okay, so communication of information, you know, in terms of what the product features are, what the benefits are, what potential changes are coming, all widely available. So nobody has an advantage over another person. And again, in our world today, that's more possible than ever with the internet, but still not likely that everyone's going to have exactly the same information. Hence, perfect competitive markets don't truly exist. If we look at the industry versus the firm, and this is a very important part too, is that you as a individual firm work within an industry that is perfectly competitive. Because of that, you as a firm have absolutely no influence on the price that you charge. The price you charge is really set by the industry and set by the market in the industry, I should say. You're purely a price taker. And if you think about the demand curve, and I'm sorry I got it made so small, but if you look at the demand curve for that particular firm within that industry. If you look at the demand curve, the demand, let's just say the market for the price is $20. It doesn't matter over if it's one item we sell or a million items we sell, the price is only going to be $20. So the demand curve is always horizontal. It is flat because effectively the price is the price is the price. And it doesn't matter how many we sell, that's the market price. So commodity markets are really very, very competitive, and if we think about all of these items, be it cows, coffee, vegetables, corn, apples, pumpkins, oil and gas, are all good examples of commodities that are traded on world markets and that will seek a price that the market dictates. However, as I said, in Newfoundland and Labrador, that poses all kinds of challenge because the impact of near perfect competition in the Newfoundland resource business, seeing we're very small players in the world market for any of the items produced, oil and gas, iron ore, fish, you name it. We're so small player, and that there are so many players, that if we think of Newfoundland as a single firm, we have no control whatsoever, none. And you can see this. Here's my fellow Buccaneer, Mr. I know his name, Wade Locke. Wade is a economist at the university, and Wade was interviewed for this article, and he basically said that the oil price plunge really is out of our control and is going to have a significant effect on the economy. So that's all we can do about it. You're not going to change it. It is really a clear-cut case of a fairly perfectly competitive market. It's not crystal perfectly competitive, but it's as close as we're going to get. So what's a firm to do? If you say to yourself, wow, I'm working in this perfectly competitive market, man, and I have no control over anything, that's not so good for me. Well, I go back to this. I want to just start back to these two basic questions that I put up front. If you are the firm, take a look at a couple of these test your understandings that you find there. So given the accompanying data from Marshall's Meat Limit, calculate the level of total profits at each output. What are the break-even and profit maximizing outputs? So if we look at this, what we got to do is calculate our total revenue in amongst this. First of all, the price times the output is our total revenue. And you see that's in yellow there. Our total costs are stated. So all we need to do is take revenue and subtract our costs, and we get our level of profitability. You can see that we're losing money, minus 40, minus 85, minus 80, minus 70, minus 30. At output 5, we have 215 revenue and 215 costs, which means we're at break even. At 7, we are generating 315 revenue and incurring 350 costs, meaning that we are break even. So at level 7 of output, we are at break even. At level 6, at 6 units of output, we are making $20 profit, which is our point of maximum profit. Any questions on that?
No, I think I'm okay.
Okay. So we've seen that this is the break-even analysis is a good one for being able to determine where a company needs to operate, the relevant range of which a company needs to operate in order to at least not lose money. Okay, so break-even profit in this particular company here, in this particular example, 5, 6, and 7 are the levels of output at which we are not losing money. We would ideally want to operate in 6, producing 6. So far we've established that the best output to produce is that which our marginal revenue and marginal costs are equal, assuming from produce all. Our next task is to find out what price level will result in either a profit or loss. So this is really our break even. And break even really occurs, we could think of our break even occurring when our average revenue and our average costs are equal. And it only makes sense, when our costs and our revenue are the same. We can consider it from a marginal perspective. Again, we can look at this particular So for any given price, the break-even outputs occur where the average revenue equals the average total cost. So you can see that demonstrated there in terms of that graph. The profit maximizing price, so the minimum point of the average variable cost curve, is really significant for two reasons. If the market determined price is below this, the firm should shut down or limit losses to a total fixed cost. And the portion of the market cost curve that lies above this point is the firm's supply curve. So there's a couple of things that you should take away from that. So first of all, if the market determined price is below this, the firm should shut down and limit its losses. Okay, what are we looking at there then? Well, we know that our break-even points, we've drawn the break-even points in this. We got our average cost going across our price, average revenue, marginal revenue line, which is the same basic line. I'll just get this here. I'm pointing my pin at the screen. That doesn't do you much good. So here's our basic $20. Here's our average cost line. Okay. So what we are trying to do here is to say to ourselves, you know, what should we do in order to maximize our profitability? So if the market price is below anything, the average variable cost, if the average variable cost, which is our, you know, cost per unit, if our price is below that cost, in other words, we're not making as much on the unit as it's selling for, then we should shut down. That only makes sense when you think about it. Why would we produce something for a loss? So we're going to have our fixed costs anyway. You know, if Comachance Oil Refinery, for example, is out there, there's fixed costs to that refinery. No doubt about it. There's people out there, security, for example, that are going to be working, no matter if the plant is open or not. So there are fixed costs. But what we got to do is limit our losses. So what we're only going to control for in terms of the decision to keep going or not is our variable cost, our average variable cost. Okay. So what would happen if the price falls below the break-even price? Well, in the short run, given the size of its operation, operations fixed and faced with a price that's less than average cost, the competitor firm really has two choices: continue to produce at a loss or temporarily shut down. This is the identical situation that oil refinery is in out there. If you're the owners of the oil refinery, that's what you're looking at right now. We'll keep going and we're losing money, or we just shut it down altogether. So as long as the losses from production are less than the total fixed cost, the firm should continue to produce. So as long as the losses from production are less than its fixed cost. Now we got to think about that for a second. We're moving along and we're losing money. Okay, we got we do have some money coming in by selling stuff, even though we're selling at a loss. So what we're doing by operating is losing money, but we're not losing as much. The decision is, are we losing as much by operating? So really our shutdown price is when a minimum average variable cost are equal. And if you wanted to find out the point that you're going to shut down that firm, it is the point when your average variable cost is at its minimum. That's important. And the other point that was made there, the second point is back here, is that we've got this marginal curve. And the marginal curve for a firm, everything above the average variable cost line, that green section, is considered its supply curve. So that would be its supply curve. So what we need to be able to do is to think about our firms in a purely competitive market by looking at how can we maximize our revenue? What is the break-even price? And at what price should we shut down? That's ultimately the questions that we need to ask from a managerial perspective. Here is what is the ideal operating range? What part of that range gives us a maximum? And what part of that range should we say, we can't make enough to keep open? So that's the real crux of this. And we often do think of the long run versus the short run. You know, and it's fine if you think that you can weather the storm in the short run and you can afford to lose some money, but in the long run, you know, we gotta consider, is this feasible? And the industry, everything can vary in the long run, so it makes it you gotta base your decisions on, will that actually work? Okay. So what I would like to do now is another one of these questions here. And it says the following data are for garden pots limited. If the price of a pot is $20, what are the break-even levels output? And what is the profit maximizing output?
Good, I think.
What you can do with this is basically generate a new table with some extra columns that you can derive, okay? So we're told what the average cost is and we're told what the output is. So we should be able to calculate our total cost. The output multiplied by the average cost would give us our total cost. The marginal cost is given to us, and we can interpret the marginal revenue because price, marginal revenue are both the same. So if we can put in another column for marginal revenue, they're $20 per. Our total revenue is just a function of our revenue per unit times how many units we produce. So our total revenue is, if we produce one at $20, we make $20. If we produce two, $40, and so on. So we can find in our break even very easily by knowing when our total costs equal our total revenue. Our total revenue is total cost. So we look at our total revenue and we look at our total cost and we find out where they match up. So if we go down to 3 levels of output, total cost is 60, total revenue is 60. If we go down to 6 levels of output, total cost is 120, total revenue is 120. So our 2 levels of break even then are 3 and 6 units. So I've got those to highlight there in the across the line with yellow. Okay, so the next question, or the other part of the question, is asking what's our profit maximizing output? Well, by definition, under the marginal approach to profitability, a firm maximizes its total profits by producing an output which the marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And you can see marginal cost and marginal revenue equal one another at an output of 5. So, and that makes sense because it has to fall on the profitability side. So break even, it loses money, breaks even, starts to make money, breaks even, and then loses money again. So you can see the natural flow there. So we have to operate somewhere in the range of 3 to 6 units of output.